Greetings and welcome to the Dr. J Vlog series. It is Sunday, April 6, 2025, and on Sundays we tackle the purpose and meaning of life. As we move forward, I think I've stumbled upon the ultimate purpose and meaning and organization of the vlog series from here on out. So here's what I mean. First, let's start with the purpose of the vlog series. What's the purpose? Well, the Dr. J vlog series consists of a series of commentaries and analyses aimed at getting closer to the truth of the matters that we're considering, based on a combination of human reasoning, logical consistency, empirical evidence, and verifiability. Secondarily, I hope to infuse my analyses with some personal anecdotes and experiences to help illustrate key concepts. So, in addition, then, the target audience of the vlog series mainly consists of the general public, mostly of adults, or at least people who are maybe at least in their late teens, shall we say, and older. How might listeners benefit from the vlog series? Well, hopefully through a genuine curiosity and love of learning. And certainly if you are interested in trying to connect with others or connect a series of thoughts and create some kind of shared or intersubjective understanding of the truth. And when I say truth, let me be clear. I don't mean truth with a capital T, but rather a small t. In other words, the truths we discover here are quite provisional in nature, subject to revision based on new evidence and insights. Often the truths that we arrive with are partial in nature. That means that we can expand upon or extend the truth further once we have new information, better information, learn from our mistakes. Now, for today's vlog, then, I want to tackle a quite serious question. And again, not because I presume to have a definitive answer as such, but just to help illustrate some key issues, and in part, from my perspective at least, how I've sort of grappled with or how I've ultimately been able to sort of make some sense out of a crucial issue. The issue being this: so how do we cope with or make sense out of the death of a loved one that we might experience during childhood? So, for example, when you were growing up, did you ever lose a family member or a close relative or friend? Most of us probably have lost someone along the way, and before we became an adult or before we turned 18. But who might that have been? Less than 10% of us will have lost a parent or a sibling or immediate close family member before we turn 18. Some will lose a very close friend while growing up. But again, the estimates are something less than 10%. That said, of course, it really depends on where we live and where we grow up. Most of us, obviously, well, at least if you're watching this vlog, you'll have grown up in Canada or the United States, maybe somewhere else. And certainly if we grow up or we live in a war zone of some kind, then the odds of us losing somebody close to us while we're growing up increase dramatically. So let's just consider then, within the continental U.S. and Canada, all right? We've long enjoyed the luxury of not having active wars on our soils, and so we're far less likely then to have someone die in our immediate family or intimate circle than, say, in comparison with people who grow up in some parts of the Middle East or some parts of South Asia, or basically any region where the world is plagued, in any region in the world where they're plagued by serious conflict or lethal forms of armed conflict in particular. So again, think back to your own childhood. Everyone has a story to tell. Everyone has memories of their formative years, and at times, various kinds of life-changing experiences. So while you were growing up, did you ever encounter someone quite close to you, or experience someone quite close to you in your intimate sphere, your immediate family, and so on, who ended up dying? Again, I don't mean an uncle or an aunt who lived somewhere on the other side of the country that you maybe saw once or twice a year at most. I mean someone who was at the core of your daily existence, someone perhaps who grew up with you, in your immediate family, who lived with you in your same household, or someone that you just saw regularly and seemingly was a permanent fixture in the daily rhythms of your life. Did you ever lose such a person while you were growing up? So, for example, I was lucky in my case that, at least within my immediate family, my family household, nobody died when I was growing up. If someone did happen to die in my family, it would have been someone like a great aunt, perhaps, I might not have even met or didn't really know, or some other, again, distant relative that I may not have known. We had a large immediate family with 6 kids, but not a ton of close relatives, since my mother was an only child, and my dad had a couple of sisters, only one of whom had children. So we had 2 first cousins, technically, but even those first cousins, I knew them, we met them, but we didn't really get to spend much time together. We rarely visited. So the point is that in the contemporary world, or at least in terms of the late 20th century and the first quarter of the 21st century, we know that the vast majority of youngsters in Canada and the United States will not have experienced the death of an immediate or intimate family member, someone directly living in their household while they're growing up. Now, beyond that, what about close friends? Some of you perhaps had close friends, or a close friend who might have passed away. Now, again, I've long felt blessed to have had the same core group of friends since childhood, all of whom are still alive and I still consider to be my best friends. All except one, however. That is, my very first and closest friend when I was a young man was a youngster by the name of John Ernst. We were both born in May of 1962, just 4 days apart. I was 4 days his elder. And John and his family lived 2 houses apart from us, not next door, but just 2 houses up from us. And so literally, our families moved into these respective houses when we were both 1 year old. So I can't remember a time in my life ever when I didn't know John and when, we weren't best friends. We grew up as besties. So, and yet we were quite different, John and myself, in temperament and disposition. I was much more physical and rambunctious, especially as the youngest of 6 children, where we were pushed to do sports at an early age and so on, very competitive. I was also much more of a smart aleck and more prone to getting into trouble and that sort of thing. As for John, he was quite gentle and kind, and I guess I would call a sweet child. We were definitely something of an odd couple, John and I. But we were nevertheless, connected from the earliest times I can remember, perhaps because of our physical proximity and because of our nearly identical birthday, but we were best friends. And since we were always in each other's lives, I never really thought too much about the differences or how we were so different in so many ways. We were kids. We enjoyed hanging out together and doing whatever young children liked to do back in the 1960s, right? Playing simple childhood games, or, running around in the yard, or riding our tricycles and then our bicycles, exploring the backwoods that was behind our houses, and so forth. Nothing particularly dramatic, nothing unusual. But again, we were different. I was definitely much rougher around the edges, and I sometimes used bad language, which we often used in my household. I don't think in his household. I also developed this habit of talking back to adults and challenging authority figures, and I got into trouble on a fairly regular basis. John, just the opposite, and he rarely got into trouble, as far as I know. So, and I mentioned that I excelled in sports, but John wasn't all that interested, and yet still we both eventually joined a peewee football team. John wasn't at all athletic, and there were actually 3 squads, competitive squads. I was on the A team, the top tier, and then there was a B squad, and then John played on the C team, the lowest squad. I remember how John didn't really like football because he didn't like hitting other kids. That's kind of a core requirement to play American football. I certainly did like the whole process, and I liked the hitting and the blocking and the tackling and the smashing into each other and all that sort of thing. But anyway, one thing truly separated us, or set us apart compared to anything else. And interestingly, the main difference actually stemmed from something that we shared in common. We were both Catholics, our families were. And that meant not only attending weekly Mass, but also there was Sunday school or catechism, or CCD, which I only learned much later referred to the Confraternity of Christian Doctrine, CCD. So here's the thing. As best I can recall, I wasn't especially religious or spiritual as a child. In fact, I was much more inclined to goof off and to not pay attention in church. And I'd get into trouble at Sunday school. John? No, he wasn't the same at all in that regard. John liked religion. He liked Catholicism. In fact, he liked religion so much that one day he always talked about how one day he wanted to be a Catholic priest. And then he'd even practice being a priest. Can you imagine? As a youngster. And he'd sometimes conduct Mass. I'm not making this up. As a child. Seriously. In fact, he liked reenacting the whole Mass. And he himself would then serve as the priest. And I'd play along, sometimes with my sister Lisa, as the altar boys behind him. But true to my impish nature, I remember not taking the whole ordeal all that seriously. And I'd do little stupid things in the background and try to break up the seriousness of the proceedings. And then John the Baptist, as I kind of came to think of him, he would merely turn around and he'd look at me almost like a stern parent, coaxing me not with anger, but with a profound seriousness in his eyes. Right? Basically, he was conveying, shut up and pay attention. This is serious business. And I did, I think, for the most part. He was my best friend, after all, and he supported me in all my stupid endeavors and with my football success, and he was always nice to me, no matter what. So I couldn't help but return the favor, if you will. And when he dressed up for Mass, I played along with him. Okay? But then one day everything changed. John became quite ill, and he went to the hospital. They ran a bunch of tests. Turns out he had some kind of a rare cancer among children, which I believe was some type of stomach cancer. I cannot recall clearly, and I may not be remembering that specific detail altogether accurately. But he definitely had cancer. and he was definitely becoming ill. And I couldn't believe how quickly he became sick, or how sick he became, and how eventually, how dramatically, and how he changed physically, and over a period of just a few short months. So when he came home from the hospital, so he was in the hospital, he was getting treatment, he would come home from the hospital, and then of course I'd go and visit him. But I just remember being shocked at how he looked, with his bloated belly, and then yet at the same time with this thinning face of his. And there was a distinct smell that I remember finding troubling, but I couldn't identify exactly what it was. I suspect it was probably the usual smells that somebody has when they're bedridden and they're, probably limited ability or access to the bathrooms, that sort of thing, or at least not what you're accustomed to. But more than anything else, I remember how much pain he was in. And I can still, to this day, see the pain etched in his kind of withering facial features. He occasionally talked about, he didn't talk up a lot about this, but occasionally then he would even talk about how much it hurt him. And when he would do that, that's when I would try to do something silly or think of something, absurd. I would try to make him laugh, okay? But he couldn't even smile at my stupid jokes or my antics. He was in that much pain. And before too long, mercifully, John passed away, relatively quickly, all things considered. And he died on February 6th, 1973, at just 10 years of age. He's interred at the National Memorial Park in Falls Church, Virginia. At least I hope he's still there. I haven't been back to the gravesite for over 50 years. Maybe I'll get there next time I'm in Virginia. I know we tend to remember those who have passed, perhaps more fondly or generously, maybe than they even deserve. But I do know this about John. He did not curse. He did not use bad words, ever, to the best of my knowledge. I certainly did. I don't recall him ever getting visibly mad or angry or aggressive with anyone else, or ever fighting. I certainly did. He aspired to be a Catholic priest one day, and I certainly did not. And so it never really made sense to me as a child. John Ernst was genuinely the nicest boy I've ever known. And as far as I could tell, he was something of an angel, pressed into duty by God directly in the service of humanity. That's my language now. I don't know what I really thought then, but I just knew that John was the really nice kid, and I, of course, fell far short of being an angel. And yet, this is what confused me. God's angel, somehow, was my best friend for the first decade of my life, and I couldn't understand then how God would take his life and somehow spare mine. I mean, I wasn't the Antichrist. I wasn't that bad a kid. Don't misunderstand me. But compared to John, there's no comparison. And so I mostly turned inward to think about and to try to cope with John's passing. I don't even remember crying when he died, but maybe I did. Perhaps I shed a few tears at his funeral. I do remember the funeral. But there's one thing in particular that I truly and distinctly remember, and that was that my mother talked to me directly about John's passing, because I was curious. I did ask. And I remember having a conversation with her. And I remember that she was the one who told me that John was an angel, sent here and then recalled to heaven by God. But why, Mom? I asked. Why did he have to leave and go to heaven? Well, my mother, bless her heart, she explained to me that, well, John's work on earth was done, was somehow already completed. And God needed John back in heaven. So that was kind of the broad explanation as I remember. But I learned, the thing was is I had a very interesting interpretation. I grasped the implication of that in a certain way at 10 years of age. So what I learned, or what I inferred from what she was saying, was that, okay, so my work and everyone else who's still alive remain incomplete. I obviously didn't know what might lie ahead in my life, but I knew in a vague or a general sense that I still had a lot of work to do. And I came to believe then that I was not yet called to return. And of course, over the years, I've learned to evaluate life and death much differently and with all kinds of new information and understandings and philosophies and so forth. But I've always retained one part about that, one specific part of that belief about each of us and our life's work. So I basically learned to accept this notion of doing our life's work and expending our energy then to fulfill our mission and life's purpose, whatever that might be for each of us. And so the thing about that is, as a result, I cannot ever remember being afraid of death or worrying about dying. And it's not because I somehow have some special insight into life after death, or that I know what happens any more than you do or any of us does, or that I know that there's a heaven that waits for us or anything like that. I mean, I hope there is. I like to have a faith in the existence of God and eternity and something greater than ourselves. I like to believe that my friend John lives eternally in the kingdom of God and smiles down upon me and us and laughs at my sometimes idiotic jokes and so on, but who really knows? Instead, I accept that John is truly a special gift from God, if you will. And I was blessed and have been blessed to have known him. And also, while I'm here in this form, I've concluded that I still have a lot of work to do. I mean, I don't know all the time what exactly that is I'm supposed to be doing, but all I know is that I'm supposed to be trying to do something here. And I'm supposed to be trying this, to the best of my abilities. And we all are. And someday, and I don't know when, I'll feel this life winding down and my energy dissipating. We all will. And there will come a time, if you will, when I'll know that my work is done. Not now. I don't feel that way at all. I'm projecting that day will come roughly in about 37 years from now. Because as I've mentioned before, much earlier on, I plan to go out with Halley's Comet, maybe in 2062. I'll turn 100 that year, and I think that my work should be done, hopefully, roughly, by then. Maybe not, but we'll see. All right. For now, may you and yours continue to create peace in your lives, nurture love in your hearts, and dole out hugs in abundance. And I hope to see you soon.